Hi, welcome to my series of immigration topics and tips. I'm immigration attorney Sedki, and I will be discussing how to prepare for an asylum interview. If you are one of the individuals who filed an asylum case in 2018 or 2019, you should be receiving your interview within 21 days of filing your asylum application or receiving your receipt notice. So it is very important to properly prepare for the interview and know what to expect on the day of your interview. The first step of preparing for an asylum case is to make sure that you have a copy of your entire asylum case that was submitted to the asylum office. That would include your I-589 application, as well as your detailed written statement detailing the reasons why you are applying for asylum in the United States. The 589 application would have all of your information, including your name, addresses in your foreign country, places that you went to school, and if there's any corrections that need to be made on the 589, you'll have a chance to do so at your interview. Included in the asylum package should also be documentations that support your detailed written statement, country reports, and any other documentation that you feel is necessary to prove that you deserve asylum in the United States. So I recommend that you always bring original documentation of anything that was submitted. So birth certificates, baptismal certificates, marriage certificates, all the originals should be in your possession on the day of the interview. Also, you would want to bring your passports for you as well as any family members that are included in your application, and those should be with you on the interview. You do have an opportunity to submit any supplemental documentations at the time of the interview. So if there are any documents that you recently received from your foreign country that you'd like to submit, this would be the time that you can actually submit it to the officer to review and consider before making a decision on your case. So that package, if you do have a lawyer who represented you in the case, you should get a copy from the lawyer. But if you are submitting on your own, you should definitely keep a copy and review it prior to the day of your interview. The second step of preparing for your interview is to find a competent interpreter. On the day of your interview, you will be proceeding in your spoken language, your native language. You can choose to proceed in English, but I recommend always speaking in your native tongue. You want to make sure that interpreter is competent, over the age of 18, and speaks English well and speaks your native language well as well, because they will be basically translating word for word what you are saying to the officer. There is a monitor that the asylum office does bring to on the phone to listen in to the interpretation. So they will be making sure that every word is translated properly. So again, you really want to make sure that interpreter knows what they're doing and at least has done one asylum interview before. The third recommendation is to bring your interview notice with you, the one that comes in the mail. Bring your copy and make sure that you arrive at least 15 to 20 minutes earlier than your interview time, because many federal buildings have long security lines, so you really want to make sure that you're there on time. So just give yourself a little extra time before your interview time. Now, who should come to the interview with you? Besides yourself and your interpreter, all family members who are included in your asylum case should be present at the interview. They will not be going into the room right away, but they should be waiting in the waiting room until the officer calls them for a few security questions at the end of the interview. So make sure that they are all present with their passports. I'm going to discuss now what to expect at the actual asylum interview. The first thing that is always done is that the applicant will be sworn an oath. So they will raise their right hand and they will swear that they are telling the truth in their story and all the information that they are providing to the officer. And once the oath is taken, the officer will proceed to review the I-589 application to make sure all the information is correct. And again, if any changes are made or additions are made to the application, the officer will mark that on the application and have you sign off that these changes were made to the final edition. So that is always the first step in the asylum interview process. Then the officer will proceed to the next step, which is to start asking questions about the detailed written statement that was submitted. The officers always have specific questions that they're asking, and those specific questions are usually tailored to the reasons why you are applying for asylum and why you fear going back to your country. And like I tell all of my clients before their asylum interview, is that it's not enough to just mention that the country conditions are very bad in your country, that you don't want to live in that country because there's dangerous conditions or the situation is not ideal to you. It is very important to stress the fear that you have in returning, and it's very important to be very specific to yourself. This is your asylum case, so you need to be very specific to incidences that affected you personally or affected your family members personally. So the stories that are in your detailed affidavit, although they are written, the officer does want to hear about these stories. They want to hear the details of those stories. So it's very important to express to the officer your fear of returning and who you're fearing. In another segment, I will explain all the legal requirements for applying for asylum. But at this point of preparing for your interview, you should be able to stress to the officer who you're fearful of and the reasons why you're applying for asylum, whether it's due to religious persecution or political persecution, or any of the 5 protected grounds for asylum. So once the officer asks all the questions that are needed and you have had a chance to respond, the officer always gives an opportunity for you to say anything you want at the end, or give your attorney an opportunity to make a closing statement if needed. But once the officer has all the information that they need, they will conclude the interview. And they will give instructions on how you'll receive a decision. Decisions are not given on the day of the interview, and depending on the asylum office, some officers request that you come back to the office in person after 2 weeks to get a hand-delivered decision, and other offices recommend waiting 2 to 4 weeks until a decision is mailed to your home address. So every office is different, but they will give you instructions at the end of the interview on how you'll be getting your decision. It's important to know, and I will be discussing this in another segment, but if you receive a decision and they have not accepted your case and given you an approval for the asylum, they will refer you to immigration court, and I will go into more details of that in another segment. But it's very important to be prepared to increase your chances of success in getting an approval. So make sure you know what is written in your asylum application and in your detailed affidavit or detailed statement that is submitted prior to submitting it to the asylum office, but also very important to know before you go into an asylum interview. I'm going to conclude with those steps on how to prepare for an asylum interview. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to my office, but please continue to follow me on YouTube for other segments about the asylum process, as well as other immigration topics and tips. Thanks.